Good, thank you very much. I think it's time to start. Peter and Stefan, you're welcome to open up your camera to welcome the audience. So welcome again to our webinar today. The alarm clock is ringing, stop hitting snooze, the missed wake-up call on climate action in the coffee fields around the globe. So my name is Jesko. I am working for the global communications from Hans and Neumann Stiftung. And today I have two guests with me. One you can already see. I think Peter is maybe still struggling with the webcam, but we can start with Stefan, who is the program manager for Coffee and Climate at HRNS, who's actually implementing CNC. Welcome, Stefan. So then I make at least a sound check with Peter. We just heard you.
Yes.
Peter.
Hello.
Ah, here you are.
Yeah.
Is your camera working?
It should. Hang on. I'm having some connection problems here.
Yeah, that's the live feeling.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I can introduce you to the audience. So Peter Baker is a climate expert from the UK. He's an advisor at Climate Edge, but also an advisor of CNC. So before we start, some general comments. I think we all are now very familiar with the rules and think, oh, hi, Peter, there you are. Welcome.
Ah, right. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, just let me introduce you to some facts. So we have, of course, a question and answer form here. You can send in your questions that we will try to answer as much as possible. In the end of the session, you can send in your questions anonymously. If you include your name, I assume that you're also okay to say it here live. So in doubt, leave it out. Good. So right into the topic. Time is running, not only in the webinar, but also in the questions of climate change. Climate change is a threat to the globe. We all know that. And that includes also the livelihoods of smallholder families growing coffee and the coffee itself as a product, of course. But not only that, other crops are also affected, the economic system and is at stake, and on top the families, not only in the tropical regions, experience extreme weather catastrophes. So on the other side, we see many reports, warnings that are permanently issued, but we have the feeling there's also a lack of action around. So our question today is there a missed wake-up call? Did we all hit snooze again and again after we read the headlines? And if so, what can we do about it? To start right into this topic, as Peter's already started sharing his screen, which is perfect, I would like to hand over to Peter, who has a deep dive into the current situation of climate change and the coffee sector. So Peter, the next 20-25 minutes are yours.
Thank you very much. You can hear me?
Yes, we hear you. We hear and see you.
All right, thank you. So, okay, climate and the coffee sector. I'm going to start with just a quick review of some of the recent events at the global level. We've had this COP26, which was, well, it was supposed to be a watershed moment after the Paris Accord in 2015 to really get things into gear and activities going and to really gear up to a big effort. Unfortunately, that hasn't really happened. Picking out one comment here from a very respected neutral commentator, Mary Robinson, who called it a historically shameful dereliction of duty. India asked for a crucial last-minute change to phase down, not phase out coal power. And there was no actual mention of phasing out or down of or even oil or gas. But it wasn't really India's fault as such, as Naomi Klein pointed out. By spinning the narrative and blaming India and China, the US is hiding the fact that there are no new obligations on climate finance or loss and damage, the two priority areas for developing country, which of course is the area I think important to us when we refer to coffee production. The talk was a lot about the annual $100 billion that rich countries had promised back in 2009, which never appeared. And now John Kerry has stated that there's a need for somewhere between $2 and $4 trillion every year to fund low-income countries to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And as one noted commentator, Adam Tooze, said, those are figures no government in the world is going to match. There isn't going to be a big green Marshall Plan. The solution is not going to come from rich governments shouldering the global burden on national balance sheets. Just a perspective on the COPs from one in 1995 to the present one. The warming was about 0.5 degrees during the first, but now it's over 1. Just to show that that during all this talking over so many years, that the climate has warmed up unabated, really. We talk about this global figure of 1.2 going to 1.5 and beyond. I think it's important to realize this is actually a mean of land and sea temperatures. Global land temperatures, which is what's important to us as coffee producers and in the industry, the land temperatures are now 2 degrees above base level. Obviously more towards the poles and the tropics, but as I'll show in a minute, warming has been quite strong there as well. And there's some very worrying signals. So we're seeing a 3-degree rise of the permafrost here, different measurements showing up to 3 degrees rise in the permafrost in the last 40 years. And strongly accelerating now methane levels in the atmosphere. So this really is some sort of historic moment. The planet is now 1.1, 1.2 degrees warming above the pre-industrial baseline. Stopping at 1.5, which is regarded as this sort of threshold, that means cutting greenhouse gases at 7% a year, which is faster than they fell during the 2020 pandemic. Excuse me. So there's now no realistic chance of staying below 1.5 degrees. And we're going to hit 1.5 around 2030, a full decade earlier than was predicted, even just 2 or 3 years ago. By 2100, anything below 2 degrees is very optimistic. If you look on the right, this graph, this was a survey of living IPCC authors, and it showed that more than 50% of those authors, and historically they've been quite conservative in their estimates. More than 50% now are suggesting that warming will be 3 degrees or more by 2100, which is absolutely catastrophic. On the left here, there are various estimates of warming based on, well, based on your credibility, really, what you think will actually happen, and whether we'll, you know, optimistic to pessimistic. This is what current policies and action are likely to lead to, a mean of 2.7, but it could be anything up to 3.6. And this is where we are at the moment. Excuse me. This is from the Climate Action Tracker, which is a good site to keep up to date on. And now we have just the most recent IPCC report, the Working Group 2 of a month ago, and that's on impacts, adaptation, vulnerability, which is exactly what interests us in coffee growing. And really it is frightening what we are seeing. Things are worse than previously thought. Changes happening at the top end of previous predictions. No longer possible to fully adapt to some global warming impacts. 40% of the world's population is now highly vulnerable to impacts of climate change. And as one commentator put it, a senior Red Cross advisor said 1.1 degrees is way more dangerous than we thought it was. And others are saying similar things. So Professor Peterson, the Stockholm Resilience Center, was surprised at the rate of change in the Earth system. So much is happening at the same time and at a faster speed than we would have thought 20 years ago. We're heading ever faster towards the edge of a cliff. So worse than previously thought, Africa seems to be especially bad. Agricultural productivity growth has been reduced by a third since 1961 due to climate change, which is more than any other region. Maize yields have decreased by an average of about 6% due to climate change over the last 40, 50 years. So where we are now, I think political efforts have faltered with no sign that collaboration will improve. The Earth is warming fast. Extreme events are rapidly increasing, with little chance that this can be halted in the coming decade. And so the future is therefore ever more problematic, making business decisions extremely difficult with little certainty. But there is one certainty. Although we don't know how things will play out in any particular region or location, it's inevitable that things are going to get worse almost everywhere. So if we look at the coffee world, focusing on the short to medium term, we can't really look at 2100. It's far too far away. So this relates more to what's happening now or in the near future. And what we've seen in coffee, this is a couple of stations in Colombia that I've chosen. This is because we got good data from there going back a number of years. These stations are right in the coffee zone, the central Eje Cafetero, and we see warming of 1 to 1.2 degrees since the 1950s. And an area which was around 1950, you could say pretty much prime coffee growing area. And now up towards 21, 22 is, one has to say, increasingly marginal. And that's equivalent to an elevation rise of 150 meters in that particular part. And partly as a consequence, we've seen major shifts. So these are the different departments in Colombia. So some departments of production has really tanked as farmers are moving out of coffee and going up in other departments, actually further south, ones with greater elevation. The changes are not by no means all due to climate change, but it's pretty clear that climate change is a part of that process. So what climate breakdown, and I think we have to call it that now, means for coffee is the frequency and severity of extreme events that we're seeing, that most of you will be very familiar with now: droughts, storms, unseasonal rains, so you get multiple flowerings, heat events, frosts, which may have something to do with it. Nobody seems to be quite sure. And what I've called here double whammies, though. So you get a drought, then followed by a flood. And one modeling study that I've seen suggests the frequency of extreme events will double between 1.5 and 2 degrees centigrade. So it's inevitable we're going to see more fluctuations. And really, coffee has always been at the mercy of these fluctuations. So we can see here, going back 70 years, this net station of Seni Cafe in Colombia, we can see the considerable fluctuations. This is mean monthly maximum temperature. You see quite wide changes in temperature of several degrees, and it's very closely related to the El Nino index. This is the Oceanic Nino index. So you can see really that the coffee is at the mercy of these large fluctuations, global fluctuations, especially Nino, but there are others as well. So it's like a beast that keeps coming back. The problem is that each time it comes back, it's slightly worse because the baseline is going up all the time. So this is a major problem, is uncertainty, which I refer to here as unquantifiable risk. We talk a lot about models, and they've been good at the global level for temperature, but not good for rainfall or other parameters of agronomic use. And as the models are downscaled from global to local, their predictive power declines. And they're really no good at all at predicting the frequency and severity of future weather events at the local level. So, you know, I could go to any farmer in the world and as they sometimes ask, you know, what's going to happen? And you would have to say, well, I don't know what's going to happen the next year or 2 or 3. You could have a couple of good years. It could be really bad. We just don't have that knowledge to be able to tell. Only, I think, in a few places there are prognostications up to 6 months ahead in East Africa, for instance, which seem to be quite accurate. Hence, there's these major uncertainties about how things will change. And therefore, this is the problem. We've got unquantifiable risk. We try to mitigate risk, but we don't really know exactly what that entails for any particular local area. I give here an example, just the changes facing coffee. I just picked Brazil here. We can't go through all the countries. Brazil is particularly important, of course, and there's been a lot happening in Brazil recently. So Brazil was the first climate adapter. So their production was based historically down the south of the country, but they moved it north in the 70s because of frost, which worked very successfully. So that was the first sort of climate adaptation, though they're not related to climate change as such. So they reduced the risk of frost, but they moved from an area of relatively high rainfall to a lower rainfall regime. So they swapped one risk for another. And what we're seeing in many parts of Brazil is, in the last 20 years especially, this is a measurement of drought. So blue is wet and red is drought. We're seeing increasing periods of drought throughout much of Brazil. And here the Arabica zone, ironically, perhaps the only area that doesn't seem to have changed much is the former Arabica zone. And recently we had frost hitting the Arabica in Brazil hard. I think the jury's still out. Is that anything to do with climate change? It's certainly instability, but we don't know. But what we do know is that with recent drought events from 2014 onwards, there are increasing signs of instability. So what we really need to know, I think the industry really needs to know, is how likely is this just a temporary fluctuation, or is it something more permanent? That is Brazil's climate becoming less stable? There's also something which Brazil demonstrates as well, which is local climate change. It's important to understand there are 2 basic types of climate change. So you've got global heating due to greenhouse gas emissions, but you've also got regional and local change due to land use change, especially deforestation, but also urbanization. And Brazil is a good example of this. So if you look at tree loss cover, this is one study of global tree loss cover over the last 150 years. You see this area has been subject to widespread deforestation, as have other parts in Africa, Central America as well. And this study, it teased out the effect of land use change on temperature as opposed to all the other factors going on, done by modeling, obviously. But they found significant, the dots indicate significance at 5% level. They found significant effects of land use change in Brazil, in Africa, in this part, which is Ethiopia, India, and Southeast Asia, which are all, I've just highlighted these areas because these are coffee zones. So the conclusion is that not only does climate change affect coffee growing, but coffee growing affects the climate, principally through deforestation. And that's a big issue now when we're talking about mitigation. And now we have the major worry about the Amazon. The US and Brazilian scientists like Carlos Nobre and Thomas Lovejoy, several for many years now, have been pointing out the worries about the Amazon and how stable it is. And recently there've been a whole slew of papers, and they're all pointing to more or less the same conclusion, that the Amazon itself is becoming less stable and is more likely to disintegrate over the coming decades. We're already seeing changes there. So we're seeing, this is the Southeast Amazon, we're seeing increased vapor pressure deficit, that's increased evaporation really occurring in the Southeast Amazon. And we're also seeing longer dry seasons. So these are indices of change happening. And if the Amazon disintegrates, then the effect will be felt all over South America, other countries, as well as the coffee growing regions of Brazil, because the Amazon is so large, it effectively creates its own weather, and it distributes rainfall beyond the boundaries of the Amazon. So when you add all this up together, there is now, for some of us now, increasing worry about how stable things are there, and what this is going to mean for, well, not just coffee, but for the livelihoods of hundreds of millions of inhabitants in the region. So I think it is something that the coffee industry really needs to get a grip on, and to consult the best scientists and come up with their best opinion about what is going to happen in the coming years. So hence the main messages of this presentation: the coffee industry is insufficiently aware and prepared for the scale of what is now happening. There is gathering activity more than previously, but there's still, I think, major gaps and uncertainties in how global coffee is changing under climate change. Few of us are sufficiently well informed to know what to prioritize, especially at the local level, I think. Insufficient data, for example, on-farm adaptations, the amount of land turning over, as we saw in Colombia, how many farmers are diversifying, abandoning, moving, what's their story? There's a lot that we could learn from what's happening there, and not getting a lot of feedback at the moment from that. And just generally, I would say a lack of coordination. We've got a lot of people doing their own little projects, but they don't really add up to more than the sum of their parts, I think. So the coffee industry's response to the climate crisis, I think we can put it into two categories: adaptation, and that we can split into genetics. So there are new varieties to disease, to drought-tolerant varieties coming online, especially I think Brazil, CIRAD, WCR, but this is a very slow process. Environment, I think various NGOs are working on landscape issues, reducing landslides, some replanting of trees, for example, protecting water sources. There's been some good work there, but again, mostly at a fairly small level. And then management, a range of agronomic tools to help adapt, which is what we've been working on with HRNS, the Coffee and Climate Initiative. And then mitigation through reducing emissions and through sequestering more carbon. But just to reiterate, it's mostly small-scale efforts, which we now see really, I think, as incommensurate with the size of the threat. So I think it's a bit different ball game now from when we started with the Coffee and Climate project over 10 years ago now. I think we felt, well, yeah, we can handle this. The climate is changing, but we can help farmers to adapt, and in the meantime hope that the politicians really get their act together. But now I think things are changing so fast with no expectation of globally coordinated mitigation. Therefore, the questions are, you know, with the farmers that we've been working with, what will happen in the next 5 to 10 years? How many will diversify out of coffee, or suffer some really big climate event, and how many will just abandon and migrate elsewhere? So can we identify those we believe at most risk to help them through these difficult decisions that they're going to have to make? At least maybe emergency preparedness, provision of up-to-date warnings, etc. So generally, I think to get away from just tweaking adaptation towards more transformational adaptation, or deep adaptation, it's sometimes called, and accepting the possibility, the reality in some places of societal breakdown. One way to look at it is a 3 domain problem, as I call it here. So you've got your existential risk to life and livelihood, landslides, floods, etc. Commercial aspects, the agronomic tools, and mitigation. And there really has been progression. I think this is where we've been working mostly in this area, in commercial area. Over the last couple of years, there's a massive interest in mitigation. But now I think with the pandemic and the war and increasing threat of food shortages this year, I think maybe the focus should be more on that. And this is a dilemma for any small project. How do you assign priorities to these different ends? So we have 3 conflicting aims. You've got business imperatives, humanitarian imperatives, and climate mitigation. And how you get funds for all 3, especially if you're just a solitary NGO with limited number of employees, I think is extremely difficult. So to conclude, I think the coffee industry is not doing enough. It's been a lot of announcements, most recently carbon neutral, and so on, but very short in detail, and I'm quite skeptical of what they can really achieve in any cost-effective way. Small-scale adaptation projects, which is really what we've all been doing, and generally the feeling that by now every country should have comprehensive climate adaptation disaster management team assembled, plans developed under implementation. So when you go to a country, ideally you'd like to meet an official who's got adaptation on his badge, and he's been well trained, he's got his coffee zoned, he can tell you where the coffee is and what he's doing in each area, etc. But that's really not happening. So I feel that the industry is sleepwalking into trouble. So just generally, we're headed with more or less unabated speed towards 1.5 degrees in the next decade, and that will continue. I think life is going to become more and more difficult for all of us, especially poor farmers who will be dealing with increasing frequency and severity of extreme weather, and inevitably, I think, mounting socio-political problems as well. A bright spot for them is perhaps we are seeing the end of very low prices for coffee. Surely greater risk has to lead to higher prices as one of the bases of economics, really. and coffee farmers' land will become more valuable, especially Arabica. They grow it at higher altitudes, and that's a more clement climate. And it the problem is that in the tropics at sea level, some of that land, it will be very difficult to grow crops reliably. So we'll all have to make very difficult choices, both in business and in life. So this is just a finals perspective, trying to look at things from afar. This is the Cassini probe from 2013 from just beyond Saturn, and you can see there's this tiny little dot there. That's us, and all life there is just a thin smear of a few meters over that surface, and we're really gravely in peril now. And I have to say, when I started this subject, working on this subject 20 years ago, I never imagined I would be sat here saying these things now. And therefore, just some of you imagine, or try and imagine, it's beyond imagining what might happen in the next 10 to 20 years. It's very sobering and extremely worrying. And I'm sorry I can't give you a more positive conclusion. Thank you very much.
Okay, Peter, thank you very much. Yes, so that definitely has been a wake-up call, not the smallest one or most quiet one. Yeah, a lot of things. And what I find striking is that the role of the humans in it is always a bit squeezed behind the different aspects we have here. So both being a victim, otherwise, on the other hand, was what you mentioned, deforestation, also being a part of the problem and so on. So we talk a lot about the impact on nature and coffee cultivation, but I would like now also to take a look at the families growing coffee or living in these areas that are affected. And I think that is now where we should give also Coffee and Climate the chance to come in and talk about the solution it provides. And you also talked, Peter, about the role of the coffee industry. And I think that's a very strong point here. So CNC trying to ensure livelihoods, smallholder farming as an income system in the shadow or under this dark cloud of climate change. Stefan, can you give us a very rough overview on CNC?
Sure, thank you, Jesko. So the Initiative for Coffee and Climate was founded in 2010 as an open, pre-competitive partnership of coffee companies and development organizations, with the objective to provide coffee smallholder families around the world with the tools and knowledge to adapt their production systems to the impacts of climate change. And climate change, as Peter mentioned, is such an enormous challenge that a single company would not have the necessary financial capacities or know-how to act effectively alone. Issues like deforestation in coffee regions are issues for all companies. Therefore, it makes sense to bundle resources and work together. And I would like to highlight once again the pre-competitive character of our initiative. Our members from the private sector cooperate together within Coffee and Climate and contribute their own expertise and know-how for a continuous development of climate knowledge for the coffee sector. And the impacts of climate change differ from region to region, sometimes even from village to village. For example, you can find in Uganda a farm that might be affected by a hailstorm, and the neighboring farm, only 1 kilometer away, might be affected by drought. Therefore, we need to know for each specific location what are the best climate adaptation strategies and practices. For that, the core element of our work is our Coffee and Climate approach, which you can see here on the left side. It represents a systematic approach by not providing a single set of answers, but instead information, concepts, and tools to support the development of location-specific climate adaptation and mitigation strategies. And because of that, one of our main elements or main components of work is a continuous identification and evaluation of climate knowledge in all our program regions. But as CNC, we are also aware that the biggest challenge is actually not generating knowledge, but how can we provide farming families, even in the most remote areas, with that knowledge? Therefore, another component of Coffee and Climate is to provide training to families on climate adaptation and mitigation. And we also know that because climate change is such a complex issue, that we need to encourage learning and exchange of experiences with other partners. Therefore, all our generated knowledge is a public good, and we share it, for example, via our Coffee and Climate Toolbox, an online library. Right now, Coffee and Climate is working in 7 countries: Guatemala, Honduras, Brazil, Ethiopia, Uganda, Tanzania, and Indonesia. In all of these countries, we have our own field offices, our own boots on the ground via our HR&S colleagues. And Coffee and Climate focuses on 3 main areas. Under Coffee and Climate Innovation, we aim to continuously identify and evaluate climate knowledge in all of our 7 program regions. This includes, among other things, the further development of coffee production system. How should the coffee farm actually look like in 2022? And for us, this includes more than just focusing on productivity or quality, but for example, the promotion and establishment of agroforestry systems, focusing on food security, income diversification, or using organic waste on a coffee farm as an important resource rather than just seeing it as a waste product. And despite agroforestry advantages, right now, smallholder coffee families do not receive a compensation for maintaining these systems, although they contribute to the long-term storage and sequestration of CO2. Therefore, under innovation, we are currently evaluating and developing a carbon accounting framework that benefits the farmer, but at the same time also meets the demand of the industry to become carbon neutral. And under Coffee and Climate implementation, the knowledge and approaches that are generated under innovations are transferred directly to our program beneficiaries. And under Coffee and Climate dissemination is all about sharing the knowledge and experiences developed within the initiative, with the sector, and with further partners. And with that, I hand over back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefan, for this quick overview. I think you're a bit under pressure today because we heard from Peter that the coffee industry might do a number of initiatives, also other initiatives might be around, but not has been done enough. So if we look at the high speed of climate change and the short window of time that he presented today, what's the difference in CNC we have here to other initiatives?
Well, I think Peter impressively demonstrated that the time horizon in which we can still act is getting smaller and smaller. And we have already passed tipping points like the melting of the Arctic sea ice or probably the Amazon. So in my opinion, we need to make use of our limited financial resources more efficiently in the sustainability or development sector. And we need to combine the strength and expertise of the private sector, public sector, and of course the farmer community. And we need to scale our work. In the coffee sector alone, we have around 30 million families who have the right and the claim to become more climate resilient. And Coffee and Climate is one option to make individual investments in climate action more impactful by bundling them into one platform initiative.
Okay, that's a platform initiative. Now, the example. So how do you address it? I know you have brought us examples. Maybe you can limit it to 2 or 3 just to give a bit of an overview what activities you develop. This is not working. Peter, maybe I can ask you in the meantime, because what I found quite impressive is that you were talking about the really pressing time we hear. And another issue is the risk management, not only on the crops, but also maybe on the surrounding. What is needed to support the risk management of smallholder families in the face of these climate change impacts?
Well, yes, that's the big question. As I said, it's there needs to be, I think, a comprehensive assessment for each zone of what the risks are likely to be, a sort of best and worst case scenario. and do it with farmers. So you come up with a list of priorities, which is sort of what we did at the start of the Coffee and Climate Initiative, but it was in a very preliminary sort of way. But I think now we should have a much greater effort, so that as I was alluding to, there should be in each country, there should be a really trained people with really good databases showing what the local problems have been recently. For instance, how well have farmers responded to droughts, and so I think there's a big data problem that could be solved. And I think a training problem, and then detailed planning and implementation. And that's perfectly possible, I think.
Stefan, we have a number of things here around. So it's not only the coffee, it's not only disasters or catastrophes, it's also the impact on other crops. So as I see you managed to share this now, Stefan, maybe you can also take a look at how we can incorporate the work with other crops into this climate change action to ensure livelihoods.
Yes, thank you. And sorry for the technical mistake. We are live, so it happens. Yes, I'm often asked what actually climate smart practices mean in reality. And it means that we identify location-specific solutions that do not only provide one benefit, but deliver a combination of benefits with the goal to establish coffee production systems that provide additional benefits than the traditional way of cultivating coffee. And here I've selected two examples. On the first slide, you can see the 5x1 diversification system that was developed in Honduras. So 5 rows of coffee and 1 row of additional crop. And this production system also uses, for example, as cover crop, not only mulching material, but mulching material that provides additional benefits, like food security, in this case, corn. It promotes additional income for the families, it maximizes productivity, and at the same time, it makes the farm more resilient to climate change. So it's a combination of different benefits, always looking at the entire production system. We do not only want to secure productivity or quality, but the households and livelihood situation of the family. And the second example is so the use of cover crops, for example. And it's not just about, hey, let's put some cover crops on the soil. It's about identifying what are the best options locally available that at the same time provide additional benefits to the families, be it food security, be it more nutrients to the soil. So it's a really systematic approach, and it's a smart way of making the farm more resilient.
Peter talked about the speed. So climate change is changing over the years very quickly. Aren't these tools then also quickly outdated? So do we need to permanently find new ways?
Well, as you could see in our coffee and climate approach, it's a continuous development. So of course, there's a frequently checking if the tools are still they still fit the local conditions, or do we need to further develop them? So there's an exchange with the farming community. If they do not work, farmers will not implement them on the farm. So there's that feedback from the farm side, from the science side. It's a continuous process.
Mm-hmm. I want to come back to the role of the partners in this. So you said that you have public partners and private partners. The private partners are from the coffee industry. Peter put a big focus on the coffee industry. At the same time, you, Stefan, now talk a lot about the livelihoods, about other crops. So where do we have this intersection between securing the future of a product, which is coffee in this case, and at the same time feeling responsible for the people growing it, for offering them alternatives? And Peter, you also mentioned the possibility that people migrate out of coffee. So why should the coffee sector or other funders get involved in this? So what is the interest or the personal motivation behind it if it's not only about the product?
Well, the reason why I love coffee so much and probably already have a lot of it flowing into my body, into my veins, is that this industry, this sector is not about numbers or statistics. It's always about the people, be it the consumers or the farming families. And the coffee business can only be sustainable in the long term if the interest and demands of both sides are taken into account. And the people in tropical regions are not to blame for climate change. We in the Northern Hemisphere are to blame. And yet it is these people in the tropical regions who suffer most from the impacts of climate change. And we must also not look at global crises separately from each other. The rising food prices due to the terrible Ukraine war, for example, are a further external shock to these families who are already very vulnerable. And our world is, as Peter, I think, demonstrated impressively, being destroyed by people. And the climate crisis is not a natural disaster, but man-made. And also the wars are not natural disasters that overtake us, they are man-made. And in my opinion, climate action is also a moral obligation for us. And it's not about the product coffee. It's about making sure that people in tropical regions can have a life in dignity and prosperity. And that includes being resilient to the impacts of climate change.
I want to drop in a question from the audience here to Peter. I think it's best because I think it's fitting in here. Is there an alternative to moving to higher altitudes, which results in deforestation? I think it's a bit, you understand what it means. Huh? I think once you say moving to high altitudes, yeah. What's the alternative?
Well, there aren't many really. The only alternative to moving upslope is to move towards the poles, and there's fairly limited prospects for that. I think actually Brazil is one. I mean, they could turn around and go back where they came from, to the south of Brazil, Paraná, around there. And I'd be surprised if some coffee companies are not looking at that. Starbucks, for instance. I know there's the problem of frost is still there, but there are ways of mitigating that. So I would be, I mean, that is a possibility. And the Brazilian agribusiness is incredibly efficient and innovative. So there definitely scope there, I think, at least in the short to medium term. But
okay,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a number of questions from the audience here that I also want to ask Stefan, but now again, okay, Peter did some name dropping, but if we talk about the sector or the industry coming in, we are now having the scientific advice from Peter and the practical part from Stefan. So if you take this, Stefan, and mix it up, what are your targets and your challenges? What do you aim at? Because if Peter, if I listen to him, I could also hit on snooze and say I cannot change anything anyway.
Yeah. No, it's important for me to emphasize that our core target group are the smallholder families and their communities, and to provide these people with best knowledge, the most efficient tools, so that they can make informed decisions about climate adaptations. That's why we are here for. And that is why the main activities of Coffee and Climate take place in the field, in close exchange and contact with the farming families, their communities, to identify problems and potential solutions together with them, and in turn making this information available to our members from the private sector as a basis for their decision making to further steer our work as an initiative. So new targets are not being set here in Hamburg or by my boss, but in close cooperation with our beneficiaries, the farmer communities, and the members of our initiative.
I have a good interest. Oh, sorry, you wanted to add something, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be too negative. You know, some of the adaptation tools that we've worked on, I mean, they're quite generic, and they do work well in a range of situations. So if you, for instance, a soil cover is extremely important, and we've measured that with a decent soil cover, you can get the temperature of the soil down by many degrees. 5-6 degrees is not uncommon, and so that will reduce soil evaporation. So there are some really good techniques. The problem is that it costs money, and investment is needed, especially if we're going to bring in more irrigation or water storage, water harvesting, that sort of thing. So there are many potential ways to help farmers, but they all cost money, and that's where we need this international money. These huge funds that were promised many years ago and haven't arrived, and all we're seeing is really very small amounts of money, and that's really the big problem.
Well, investment's an important point here. So access to finance, being able to invest into important tools, is that part of Coffee and Climate? So that people know where they should invest to have climate smart practices in place?
Well, we want to improve the decision-making process of farming families so that they have the best knowledge and tools available for their location, and they can take informed decisions what kind of tool to implement on their farm. And of course, Peter's absolutely right. We need to work together. Even though it's a buzzword, I know, it's collaboration, but therefore our initiative is open for new members and new partners, because climate action is not cheap. It costs money, of course.
Okay, a question I think you both will answer no. I know your answer, but I ask it anyway, coming from Carrie here. Is it time to send out the message to young coffee drinkers worldwide that their future selves will likely need to stop drinking coffee as it becomes increasingly scarce and expensive?
Ooh, that's a hard one.
You can say no.
I mean, people should definitely drink coffee that has got some sort of label that they can be assured to a certain extent that that some funds are getting back to farmers. They're being paid a little bit more. However, I do think a lot of these schemes need to be looked at again. If you look at all the sustainability schemes, for instance, they cost. I think IDH did a study 2 or 3 years ago that the annual cost of these schemes is 350 million a year, and I don't think that's the full costings, because it doesn't cost. They don't include farmers' costs. So there's a big question. There's a lot of money being spent on sustainability, as they call it. But how much are we getting for that money? And I think that needs to be looked at as well.
And yeah, another question we have here. I think I would like to ask Stefan if he feels represented with that. It's a bit long, so I try to short it down. Are there examples of strong initiatives between private sector, NGOs, and such working together to drive necessary climate smart behavioral change? And effectively, because as it says here in their experiences, most of these initiatives are not working very well. So do you feel addressed when asking for such a strong initiative?
So I would not do a name dropping now, but of course there are other initiatives in the sector. So we are not the only initiative that is working on climate resilience. And therefore we are open to cooperation. We want to work with other stakeholders. And we have to, right? Our initiative, let's say, combines the innovation part, the implementation part, and the dissemination part. So it's what we can offer to other partners to work together.
Mm-hmm. Good. There are a number of technical questions here, which I doubt are good and easy to answer here. So also looking at the time, I would like to ask Peter if he could summarize, like in, I don't know, 30, 60 minutes, after hearing today, what you think would be most urgent to place as a really efficient action on the ground.
Yeah, you want me to do it now?
Yeah, if you can, if you're spontaneously. Otherwise, I ask Stefan something and you can think about it.
Well, I think it's what I was saying, really, that it is, I mean, there should be in each country, in each zone in each country, there should be people who have detailed knowledge of that land. They should have the tools to be able to zone that coffee out. So you've got, they would have marginal land, mainstream and specialty, and that they would have separate tools to adapt in each of these, and the funds to roll that out. So that's really what is needed, is to train a cadre of people up and let them have the funds to do that. It would be, it would cost, I guess, tens of millions of dollars. But as I was saying, there is a lot of money rattling around in this, what you could call the sustainability industry, and a bit more of that funding perhaps should go into planning. I mean, what we've had in the past 20-25 years of sustainable coffee it's been a rules-based system, and I think it has to change to being a sort of risk-based system. So you have to identify for each area what are the specific problems and work on those, and that's the difficulty, I think.
Okay, and before I ask the last question to Stefan, I think because also fits here one more question from the audience, and that's just matching into Peter's comment, and that's the feasibility. So you're providing tools, Stefan. How practical are so? Are they really feasible for the farmer families to use them, and how do they get information? Can you wrap that up in 20 seconds?
Sure. I mean, these tools are not developed in Hamburg again. These tools are developed together with the farming families. So if a tool is not feasible for location, farmers will not use them and they will not be included into our work. They are hands-on, they are practical because they are developed together with the farming community.
Mm-hmm. And then also from your side, as a final thought, if you take the learnings from Peter's presentation, the discussion with the audience, and what you presented about CNC, what did you learn? Where do you want to bring Coffee and Climate next?
Well, of course, Peter's presentation showed a dark scenario for the future, but I'm not the guy who likes to show the white flag. And I also think we owe it to the farming communities, to the people in tropical regions, not to give up. And adaptation is possible. And Coffee and Climate provides one option, one solution here, with practical work, a motivated network. And what counts at the end? Our members from the private sector are not only funding members, but are involved in the development of our initiative and implementation. And this is also the chance for other partners, for other stakeholders to join. And yeah, direct climate action is possible. So
okay,
I'm more motivated than ever.
Okay, so you can spread your motivation if people are interested to get in touch with you. I want to thank you for joining today. We had a lot of questions coming in, and when I prepared for this webinar, I must also confess that I now see that the issue is bigger than we expect, and also looking at the questions coming in. Sorry if we couldn't answer all of them, so I can invite you to keep following Coffee and Climate. Join our newsletter. You have now the chance to quickly scan this QR code on your screens to stay up to date. Stefan is for sure also available for you. You can also reach Peter Baker through CNC for future questions. The webinar will be made available online, of course, as a recording on the website. And yeah, in the past years, we kept saying here, stay healthy and safe. And unfortunately, we have to add this now with another information, hope for peace in the war we are seeing in Europe now. So do this, stay healthy. And I thank you very much, Peter and Stefan, for the participation and for your participation, and wish you a great rest of the day. Thank you very much. Goodbye.